Shalom, my brothers and sisters. I hope you're well. Welcome back to Abantu Bible Academy, where we are preparing Yah's people for his return. This first course that we are running is called The Battle of the Age, and it talks about the battle between the Confederacy of Esau and the Commonwealth of Jacob. In our first module, we'll talk about the Commonwealth of Yshar'el, and the first two topics we'll cover, we have collapsed into one, and we call the seed of Abraham, Yatsecha and Yakobo. Yatsecha is the Hebrew name for Isaac, and Yakobo is a Hebrew name for Jacob. We run this course every Shabbat of April and May. We start at 2 o'clock and we finish at 5. Let's get into it. I hope this will be useful. And my hope is that as we create gaps in the way we present this course, you will go and fill in these gaps through your own personal reading. What we really want to do is to take you back to the beginning and start to understand what was promised then, because it is important to what happens at the end. Why this course? The first reason is because of this obscure verse that we find in Genesis chapter 2, which talks about Adam and Eve. It says, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined with his wife, and they shall become one flesh." This is the culmination of the biblical narrative. When you look at the book of Revelation, at the end, you see a wedding. And because the end has a wedding, logically, you can conclude that all that you have in the narrative is building up to that end. And we'll see how we can understand that. Secondly, there is this blessing that Yakobo gets from his father, Isaac, Yatsecha. It says, "Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." This is the blessing that Isaac gives to Jacob. And as you can see, it is about rulership. It's about other peoples serving Jacob. When Jacob received this blessing, Esau was out there hunting so that he can receive what would have been the same blessing. So Jacob beat Esau to it. And the circumstances of this must be understood as you read Genesis 25, and then you get to Genesis 27. But this is what precipitates this battle between Esau and Jacob. And it spills into a battle between Edom, which is the nation that comes from Esau, battling against the nation that comes from Jacob, and that is the Commonwealth of Israel. So Esau will get his confederacy, and Jacob will obviously have his Commonwealth, and Esau will be pursuing Jacob in that way. So we want to understand what is the contemporary relevance of this blessing because it informs the biblical narrative. Why now? That brings us to the battle that we have now, the war between Esau and Iran. This is the battle that biblical scholars have been waiting for centuries. This is a battle between Esau and Media, Iran. When we understand the narrative and the players in this narrative, we are able to understand what is happening here. But more than that, we are able to understand who is who and who should we be looking out for victory. Because this battle is really the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end of Gentile rule, the rule of Esau, who would rule by the sword. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me continue. As Abantu, and I'm talking about even those who were taken away from us through slave trades, the cities in India, our people in the islands, Hawaii, in Australia, Madagascar, Mauritius, our people in the Americas, South America, the Caribbean islands, and North America. These people are one. These people have been scattered and are the nation of Israel. We have had war waged against us. It is a spiritual war, but it also manifests into cultural, military, and psychological war. We were born into this war, but we did not know. Why? Because when we read the Bible, it never crossed our minds, at least some of us, if not most of us, that this is about us. So we want to be able to wage this war. But we have to understand the weapons and the tools that have been used in these wars. And scripture help us to understand and arm ourselves. Aeschylus said this about war. He says, in war, truth is the first casualty. Meaning that the first thing that gets attacked when there is war is truth. People spread propaganda. They make what is true false and what is false true. And we want to be able to understand what has been harmed, what truth was taken away from us, and restore that truth. Because that is the only way we will win this war. Yes, people have truth as part of their weaponry. In our arsenal, in that armor of Yahuwah, there is truth. The belt of truth. That's where we hang our swords. So we must recover and restore truth. And I'm hoping that when we look at the Bible as a narrative with the beginning, middle, and the end, we will be able to get the truth for ourselves and understand this battle. Now, I've added beginning of the end, because in my assessment and the assessment of many, the coming of Jesus, his first coming, was the beginning of the end. And this narrative perspective is useful. In fact, it is in keeping with what or with how Yah works. Because in chapter 46 of Isaiah, we read in verse 8, remember the former things of old, for I am Elohim, and there is no other. I am Elohim, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. This means that we need to go back to the ancient times and look at what was declared. Because what was declared there is what the end is going to be. So if we want to understand how the end looks like, if we want to understand how this age ends, we go to the beginning. And that's what we're going to do. The story of the Bible is the story of the Hebrews. It starts with the creation of man, Adam, and we see sin coming into the picture. It gets so bad that by the time of the 10th generation, which is Noah, the God of the Bible has had it. And he decides to start again by bringing the flood to destroy all men. But he saves this family through the ark. But there's something else that survives the flood, and that is the Nephilims. We'll talk about the Nephilims in our module 2 when we speak about Esau. But suffice it to say that the Nephilims survived the flood and they continue to exist and propagate their seed. And you see that they then infiltrate Esau. But Yah would bring Abram from the line of Shem, and he would start working through Abram to create a new humanity. And that is why it is important that we understand this man. Even his name is crucial. So let's talk about it. His name was Abram, and in the Hebrew, you would say Abaram, which means exalted father. But his name would be changed to father of many nations. And in the Hebrew, if you want to really understand it, you want to pronounce it as Abba Rabbah Amma. That BA in the middle was swallowed so that the name comes to us as Abraham. And even in the English, they then take out the last A and he is called Abraham. So if we do that, we will never understand what his name means. We want to go to the Hebrew name, and we find that Abraham, father of many nations, is made up of 3 words. Abba, father, Rabbah, many, Amma, nations. So Rabbah has the same root as our Sesotho word roba, which means to break. And when you have a pencil and you break it, now you have 2 halves. So you've multiplied it. And then if you break this 2, now you have 4. You've multiplied it. So roba means to multiply, and Rabbah means many, because now you've multiplied something. And Ama is a Hebrew word for nations or tribe. Ama Zulu, Ama Ndebele, Ama Xhosa, Ama Pedi, a nation. So right there and then, you can see that the father of faith spoke our language, the Hebrew, because Hebrew has been preserved. Ancient Hebrew has been preserved in the Bantu languages. The Bantu languages are dialects of Hebrew, because then we spread all over the place and we picked up words, new sounds. We replaced this letter with that letter, and we then constructed our own language as we go along. But the root is Hebrew. So here is the father of many nations, Abba Rabba Ama, popularly known as Abrahama or Abraham. Abraham will then become a father of Yatsecha and other sons we will talk about. But this will be the line that gives us Jacob, Judah, and all that until we get to Yeshua, Jesus Christ. So this, my brothers and sisters, is really the subject of the biblical narrative, the story of the Hebrews. Now, the battle between Esau and Jacob. We want to identify that indeed there is a battle, but also we want to go back to the genesis of this battle, where it starts, which is in Genesis. But also we'll see some clues about how we can identify who Esau is. It's not the subject of this course, but it is helpful to make that observation at this point. Genesis 27, verse 39. This is Yatsecha, Isaac, blessing Esau. But this is after he had already blessed Jacob with the firstborn blessing. Important to remember that, and we will talk about that a bit later in the slides. In 39, it says, then Yatsecha, his father, that's Esau's, answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. Esau was blessed with the sword. Esau was blessed with the sword. Let that sit with you for a while. Esau was blessed with the sword. If you want to know who is Esau today, you look at the people who are good in making war. Because the sword just means war, killing, military. But there are other evidence, supporting evidence that will tell you who Esau is. But from the biblical narrative, you can know who Esau is by looking at who is good with the sword. And again, you can see that he is meant to serve his brother Jacob, but he would struggle against that, and he would struggle against Jacob. So already we can anticipate that there's going to be a battle. And indeed, there is a battle. We read in Psalm 83, Asaph is the writer of this psalm, and he's appealing to Yah, says, please don't keep quiet. Do not be silent. Why? For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. that the name of Yshar'el, as Israel, may be remembered no more. And he would go on to list the people that are in this confederacy, these people who are the enemies of Yahuwah, who have taken crafty counsel against Yshar'el. And at the top of this confederacy is the family of Edom. That's the family of Esau, the nation of Edom. They're warring against Yah, but they can't get to Yah, so they are attacking his people. And then third, and there are many others, but we'll stop here. Isaiah 63 tells us that Yah comes down on Edom. It reads, "For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom and on the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of Yah is filled with blood, for Yah has a sacrifice in Bozrah." Bozrah was the capital city of Edom. Bozrah represents the seat of this power that Edom would have in the last days. A great slaughter in the land of Edom, for it is a day of Yah's vengeance, the year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Yah would make war against Edom because Edom would be the ones who destroy his temple. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple, Esau was there saying, raise it, even to the foundation. That's Psalm 137. But the temple was rebuilt, and the Romans came to destroy that temple also. Esau. That's why Yah comes for his vengeance on Esau, on Edom, on Bozrah. So these three scriptures will tell you that the battle is of this age. The end of the age is ended when Esau is destroyed. But we must not forget that Esau will be sent to Yshar'el by Yah as a rod of punishment. Even though Esau is punished himself, he was sent by Yahuwah. And this demonstrates the sovereignty of Yah. This is how we know that Yah is sovereign. In Jeremiah 5, we read in 15, "Then because you speak this word, behold, I will make my words in your mouth fire." So this is as a result of what Yshar'el was saying to Jeremiah. He says, and these people would. So Jeremiah's word will be fire, and Yshar'el will be wood, and it shall devour them. "Behold, I will bring a nation against you from afar, O house of Yshar'el," says Yah. It is a mighty nation. It is ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. So Esau will be this nation. Esau is this ancient nation. In Genesis 36, a chapter dedicated to Esau and his genealogy, we read, "Now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Yshar'el." So we know that this nation that he sends is Esau, because Esau had a bone against Yshar'el. He had beef. So Yah used Esau's anger to punish Yshar'el. But he would say to Esau that, hey, you kept this animosity for too long for your brother, and you went overboard, and that is why I'm going to punish you and your nations, or the nations that got into a confederacy with you. So we must not forget Yah's sovereignty. This is what I was saying is the cause of this conflict. Remember, Esau was blessed with the sword, but Jacob was blessed with a kingdom, with rulership, with sovereignty. Chapter 27 of Genesis and 29 says, "Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren and let your mother's sons bow down to you." This is what Esau is fighting for. And he wanted to take it by force because he was blessed with the sword. So I'm just setting up the course to understand that there is a battle. Esau has waged war against his brother Jacob. Let's get into the details, but let's talk about the seed of Abraham. Abraham obviously was Abram at the beginning. And Yah comes to him in Genesis chapter 12, and he made him a promise. Now, Genesis 1 to 11 is about how Yah creates mankind and mankind get corrupted. And this corruption is accelerated by the rebellious angels who come and have copulation with the daughters of men, and they produce giants. We spoke about how giants survived the flood. So when they come out of the flood, out of the ark, Yah makes a covenant with Noah, but humanity will still rebel by not wanting to spread and multiply and fill the whole earth. This happens, or is recorded in chapter 11, but in chapter 10, we are told that the nations are divided. And you see that in Deuteronomy chapter 32, we are told that they were divided according to the number of the children of Yshar'el. Some translations will say according to the number of the sons of God. But Yah would determine to create a new nation that he calls his inheritance. And this new nation will be created through Abraham. Let's read the promise. "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Remember, we read in Isaiah 46 that Yah declares the end from the beginning. This is the beginning. We are still in Genesis, and we hear about this promise. The Apostle Paul will use this in his letter to the Galatians. And he would say that the gospel was first preached to Abraham. And he would quote the yellow part, or the part highlighted in yellow, "And in you all families of the earth shall be blessed." But I want us to just analyze this promise, particularly around who will be blessed. Because clearly we can see that it will be those who bless Abraham and this great nation given to Abraham, or created through Abraham. So it is misleading to think about the gospel as an unconditional promise. And first of all, this promise is to the benefit of Abraham himself, or Abraham at that point. So Abraham will be blessed because people would want to be blessed by Yah. And this is when everyone understands who Abraham is and who this great nation is. And at the moment, as we all know, some people are blessed because they have presented themselves as the descendants of Abraham. So nations are blessing them. They are giving them all this kind of protection, money, and all those things. Why? Because nations understand that for them to be blessed, they have to bless the great nation of Abraham. So these nations, some of them know, so they're just playing along with this deception, but some of them don't know. And they're doing what they see in Scripture as a requirement in order for them to be blessed. So I hope we understand that this promise is to the benefit of Abraham and his great nation. And that great nation is the Bantu people, the people of Yshar'el. And we get to that as we progress. The family of Abraham is made up of 8 sons. Yah promised to give Abraham and Sarah a child, but when Yah seemed to have been taking his time, Sarah grew impatient and he gave her maidservant Hagar to Abraham. And he said, "Let me build you a family through my servant Hagar." And Abraham went into Hagar and she conceived and Ishmael was born. But later on, Yshar'el was conceived and he was born. After Sarah died, Abraham married Keturah and he had 6 more boys. But the promise was through Yshar'el, because the promise was given to Abraham and Sarah. In Genesis 14:13, we find these words: "The one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew." Abram was a Hebrew. Let's think about what this word means, Hebrew. It means to cross. It says the crossing over or passing through a land or water to gain access to the side beyond. This is from the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible. Get it. If you don't have it, let me know. I can send it to you. Very, very useful. This root, well, this is a 3-letter root word. When you add a vav before the resh, you get the word for produce. You also get a word for purpose. So Hebrews are linked to the crossing, and linked to production, and they're linked to purpose. That's how you can then put together these words. Let's continue. I wanted to show you the main crossings of the Hebrews in the biblical narrative. The first one was by the patriarch himself when he crossed over the Euphrates to access the land of Canaan, the promised land. The second one was when the nation of Yshar'el came out of Egypt. The children of Yshar'el came out of Egypt and they crossed over the Red Sea. And then they also had to cross over the Jordan from the east. And then the last crossing, I believe, would be when we cross over the rivers of Ethiopia to the promised land, back to the promised land, when Yah restores his people. Because in Zephaniah 3, we read that he would hide his people beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So for them to get back to their land, they will have to cross over Hebrew, the rivers of Ethiopia, the same rivers. Hebrew, crossing over. Now, this is the land. These are the boundaries of the land as we find it in, or found them in Genesis chapter 15 when this promise was made. Different books will have different boundaries, but this is really the land as you can map it out from the boundaries given in Genesis 15. That nation is very important for us to understand. That promise of a nation, crucial for us to understand what a nation is, so that we can identify these people, so that we don't have to be mixing it up with, either a religious group or no. It's a promise of a nation. So let's understand what a nation is. The online dictionary says a nation is a country considered a body of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language inhabiting a particular area or territory. So it can be a country, but it doesn't have to be a country. It can be people who come from the same man, and because of that, they will share the same history, the same culture or language, and then they will also be inhabiting a particular area, but they will also be scattered. What's important is that they come from a common ancestor, one man. So nations are made in the bedroom and not in the boardroom. You cannot legislate what a nation is. You can legislate what a country is or a state is. But a nation comes from one man. This word nation, the etymology comes from Latin, nasi, and it developed until Middle English, where nation, was constructed. And you can see that it means to be born, nat, to be born. So it has to do with your birth. In Genesis 10, we find Yah dividing the nations, and he uses some criteria. He uses tongues, families into nations, and he gives them lands, right? So the most important characteristic that we see about a nation is a language. This is said about the descendants or the sons of Japheth from verse 5. In verse 20, it is said about the descendants of Ham, and it is also said about the descendants of Shem, being divided after their families, after their tongues, in their lands, after their nations. Let's talk about Yetzer, the son of the covenant. In chapter 15, Yah comes to Abraham. He says, "Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your reward, your very great reward." Then Abraham responds. He says, "El Shaddai, Almighty, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" Then Yah brought him outside and said, "Look now toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." And he, Abraham, believed in El Shaddai, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Then later on, in the same conversation, Abraham would ask, and he said, "El Shaddai, how shall I know that I will inherit it, this land and this great nation?" And that is when Yah cut a covenant with Abraham. So the important thing to notice here is that this covenant was made between two righteous persons, because Abraham was credited with righteousness. Yah imputed righteousness to Abraham. Two peers are getting together and making a covenant. But it is the more powerful peer. I'm not saying peer because they're equal in any way, except that they are both righteous. Very important for us to understand that this is our great, great, great grandfather. This is our progenitor. We come from a man who was righteous, and Yah made a covenant with him. And what's important to notice, and I hope you have read the supplement that I posted in the classroom, that it was only Yah who walked through that path, those animals. And the way the picture was done is wrong. The animal halves must be on opposite ends. But that's okay. We get the picture. Abraham was asleep when Yah moved through two objects. Yah saying that I will be responsible to make this covenant work, stick. I am taking sole responsibility for this. But we must also remember that Abraham, our father, obeyed Yah. And this is something that we don't emphasize as much as we emphasize grace and bliss, all these other things. In Genesis 18, we read, and Yah said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. This is when Yah was contemplating destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of Yahuwah, to do righteousness and justice, that Yahuwah may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. Yah taught Abraham his way. That's why he says, I have known him. To know is also to teach, to be intimate with somebody, to get to know somebody. For I have known him in order that he may command his children to keep the way of Yahuwah. And then we see in Genesis 26, Yah speaking to Isaac, and we're going to talk about Isaac a bit later, that the reason why Yah is blessing Isaac is because of his father's obedience. Let's read in verse 3. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give this land, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Why? Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. There were laws even before Moses came to give the law to Yshar'el. Abraham kept those laws. He kept those commandments. He listened to Yah's voice, and he kept Yah's statutes and charge. I think it's important to understand what kind of a man Abraham was. He was an obedient man. So much so that he was even willing to give up his son to Yah. And when he was about to do it, he was about to put the knife on Isaac, the angel of Yah stopped him, and this is what the angel said. By myself I have sworn, says Yah, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the sea. And your descendants shall possess the gate of the enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Abraham was blessed because he obeyed. And here is what I want to emphasize. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. The gospel presents Yahusha as the gate. Think about that. Think about the implications of that, and let's maybe discuss it when we have the opportunity. What does it mean? Your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. This is a good thing for Abraham's descendants, but it's not good for their enemies. Now, there are two topics that you can think about. One is how does a promise relate to covenant? When you think about the promise that was made in Genesis 12, how does it relate to the covenant that was cut in Genesis 15? And then I hope you have read the entire story of Abraham until he died. If you haven't, please do that and sort of understand how Abraham prepared the way for Yatzecha, how he set up things for Yatzecha so that Yatzecha will have the life that he wanted. Okay, wonderful. This is the end of topic one. I said we're going to combine with a topic two and talk about the seed of Abraham, Yatzecha, and Yaakov. So let's do that with just one video. This is the inheritance of Yatzecha and Yaakov. Why the name Yatzecha? Think about the circumstances of his birth. Abraham and Sarah were old when this promise was made. And Abraham laughed, and Sarah also laughed when she heard about it. And even when he was born, Sarah said, "My friends and family will laugh with me." But this name was given to them by Yah because both of them laughed. In fact, Abraham laughed and he said, "You will call him Yatzecha." That's to laugh in Hebrew. Yasheka is to laugh in Hebrew. The evolved pronunciation is that. You can have a look at this in the concordances and you'll see that, it will say Yatzecha or Tcheka is both Tzecha and Tcheka, words for laugh in Hebrew. So that's where the name comes from. He would marry his niece, Rebecca. And Rebecca will struggle to fall pregnant, but Yatzecha will go and plead her case with Yah, and Yah allowed her to conceive. And during her pregnancy, there was a struggle in her tummy. So she went to ask Yah and say, "Yah, I thought my pregnancy was good. What's happening?" So Yah said to her, "You are carrying two nations. These two nations have already started to struggle in your tummy, and this will be their relationship. You are carrying two nations. One will be stronger than the other. There will be two manner of people, and the older will serve the younger. The older will serve the younger." So Esau came out first, and he was red. And Jacob came out, and they don't tell us how Jacob looked like. And the reason they tell us how Esau looked like is because he did not look like the people of his day. We are told that Esau became a great hunter, a knowledgeable hunter. In Hebrew, Tzayid Yada. And Jacob stayed at the house with the mother. Isaac loved Esau because of the game that he used to bring him, but Rebekah loved Jacob because she stayed at home with him and suppose helped her cook and take care of household chores. One day, we are told, Genesis 25, Esau came up and he was hungry, he was famished, and he found Jacob having cooked a stew. And he said, "Can I have some of your stew?" And Jacob said, "Well, in exchange for your birthright." And the text doesn't say Esau struggled with the thought of doing the exchange. The immediate thing we see is Esau said, well, what use is this birthright to me? I'm about to die anyway. So he sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of stew. And the text says, so Jacob gave Esau the stew and bread and something to drink. Esau drank and went away. And in that way, the text concludes, Esau despised his birthright. Esau despised the birthright and he sold it. So the question that you want to ask yourself is, who owned the birthright after this transaction? Who was then older culturally? Because it was permitted that the firstborn can sell his birthright. It wasn't necessarily a strange thing I hear. I don't have examples, but in my reading, apparently, this was it wasn't common, but it happened. So it wasn't strange that Esau would do that. But it was done for those who despised the birthright. And maybe sometimes they are forced to do it. I don't know. But what we can tell here is that Esau did not respect the culture. So ask yourself, who owned the birthright? And the birthright goes with the blessing of the firstborn. In English, I think they call it primogeniture. Primogeniture. So Esau sold it, and Jacob now possessed it. Now, I wanted to just make sure that we understand that what the Bible describes is not an impossibility. Because in 2010, an article read, I can't remember where I got this from, but this is common knowledge. A black Nigerian couple in London had a white baby girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Doctors ruled out albinism, suggesting dormant white genes, a mutation or both, sparking surprise and curiosity since neither parent had known white ancestry. So there we have it. A black woman producing a white, baby. But I digress. Abraham, we've said this already, that this promise of a great nation will come through Yshar'el. But Yshar'el will have these twins. And it is clear from the text, maybe not as far as we've read, but as you continue, this land will continue in Jacob, and Esau will be the one who serves Jacob because he's the one who comes out first. So when he comes out first, red and hairy, then the people know that, okay, so that means that Esau is to serve Jacob. And Esau will become the father of the Edomites, and Jacob will become the father of the 12 tribes of the nation of Yshar'el. Edom, Yshar'el. The 12 tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Yosef, that's Joseph, produces Ephraim and Manasseh, or Manasseh and Ephraim, and then we have Benjamin. Let's talk about Jacob. Why the name? He was named after the heel. A heel is shaped in a crooked way. So that's why they called him Yakobo or Yakoba. As simple as that. People want to say, it's because he was a deceiver and all that. Nonsense. He was named after a heel because he held on to the heel of Esau. And that action, the book of Esdras tells us that it was prophetic. It says, for Esau is the end of this age, and Jacob is the beginning of the age that follows. 2nd Esdras chapter 6 and 9. This verse marks a prophetic division in time where Esau represents the current world order, while Jacob signifies the start of the coming age. And indeed, this age ends with Yeshua, the king of Jacob, ruling for 1,000 years as we prepare for the new heaven and the new earth. Again, very important for us to remember that. The people who are in charge today are Esau. It was said right from the beginning that Esau will break the yoke of Jacob from his neck and he will rule over Jacob. But Jacob will be preserved and restored. Jacob will be redeemed. You will see this when we look at the life of David and Solomon later on. Now, I wanted to just make this illustration of what happens when somebody moves, right? The heel, when it is lifted up, signifies the next step. A man doesn't take the next step until the heel is lifted up. I think in the same way, the next age doesn't come until Jacob is lifted up. And that's what we see in the biblical narrative. Now, I wanted to play this, but I'm afraid it might just take long and spoil this video. But I wanted you to go and Google why the West or Western teachers continue to insist that Jacob is a deceiver, that Jacob stole Esau's blessing, right? Because this image captures the time when Isaac calls Esau. And he says, Esau, I'm about to die. I can't see properly now. I want to give you your blessing. Now, I don't know if Isaac did not know about the transaction or he was just going against it. But he called Esau as his firstborn. And he says, go and hunt for me, cook the game as I like it, and I will bless you. But Esau doesn't say, Dad, let me tell you something. He doesn't say, oh, wait. I sold my birthright. He doesn't. He then says, okay, let me do this. Fortunately, Rebecca was listening in this conversation. And she's the one who goes to tell Jacob. He said, Jacob, your blessing is about to go. Let's make a plan. And indeed, Jacob would appear in front of Isaac as Esau and get his blessing. Now, again, like I asked, after the transaction, who did the blessing belong to? The blessing that goes with the birthright. And the obvious answer is Jacob, the one who bought it. So this is how the will of Yah gets to happen. Because the will for this too was for Jacob to get the birthright. And there we have it. You have it. People blame both Rebecca and Jacob, saying, they are forcing God's hand and blah, 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 and all that. It is what it is. It is what it is. It happened just this way that Yah wanted it to happen. Now, after reading the story, I'd like you to engage with these two questions. Who deceived who? Now, you can tell by the story that, did Esau deceive the father by not telling him that, hey, Papa, I sold the birthright, so we must call Esau? Jacob? What do you think? And then, once you determine the different deceptions that happens in the story, think about this. Which deception is righteous and which one is not? Now, a righteous deception? Yeah, there is. It's a thing. It's a thing. Think about that. Think about that. Now, let's talk about Jacob getting his blessing. This is a picture taken during the George Floyd protest in 2020. And you see this group of white people, Edomites, bowing down to the people of Israel. This is not a photoshopped picture. This is what happened. These people were asking for forgiveness. They were bound down to these brothers and sisters of ours. And obviously, I know who I'm talking to, you know. So this might be a small gesture, but I can assure you that this is how the end is going to be. Because this is Yah's will, that nations will bow down to Jacob. Nations will bow down to Israel. This is just a foretaste of that. Genesis 27 and 29, let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren and let your mother's sons bow down to you. This is a blessing that Isaac, or at least part of the blessing that Isaac gave to our father Jacob. And maybe what you can do is to discuss the blessing and its implications. So go read it and think about what does it mean? The whole of it, including the land, the fatness of the land, wine, and dew, and stuff like that. Go read it. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. I know there are 14 of them. Let me explain. So you have Reuben the firstborn, Simeon the secondborn, you have Levi the thirdborn, Judah coming from Leah, and then you have Dan and Naphtali coming from the maidservant of Rachel, and then you have Asher and Gad coming from the maidservant of Leah, whose name was Zilpah, and then you have Issachar and Zebulun from Leah herself. Then eventually you have Josipah, as Joseph, and Benjamin. And Josipah will have two boys, Manasseh and Ephraim, and Yshar'el, Jacob, would adopt them as his own children. Because he got them, that's Josipah, got them while he was in exile in Egypt. And when Jacob went to Egypt and he saw them, he said, hey, I'm adopt them, right? These are mine. What you have after that is yours, but these I am taking for my own. And that is why there is this concept of the Commonwealth of Israel, the Commonwealth of Yshar'el. It includes the nations that will come from Ephraim, and we'll talk about that in our next week work. Okay, now I want to demonstrate that the 12 tribes of Yshar'el permeates the biblical narrative. The 12 tribes of Yshar'el permeate the biblical narrative. Let's start in Genesis 49. So this is the end of the book of Genesis. And we are told that Jacob, while they were in Egypt, called together the 12 sons and he blessed them, telling them what was going to happen to them in the latter days. Now, the latter days is the period between Yeshua's first coming and his second coming. And after blessing them, we read in Genesis 49, it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Yshar'el, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. We move to Acts 26. This is after Yeshua had come and gone. The Apostle Paul is appearing before Governor Festus and King Agrippa. That's Herod Agrippa II. The Apostle Paul was kept in Caesarea as he was awaiting to be transferred to Rome after he had appealed to Caesar. He was arrested and he figured that he was not going to have a fair trial in either Judea or Galilee. So he appealed to Caesar. So before they could transport him to Rome, they kept him in Caesarea. And Festus became governor after Felix. And Felix had kept him there as well, hoping that he would get something from the Jews. But Felix was replaced by Festus, and Festus is stuck with this prisoner. He doesn't know what to say as he sends him to Rome, and he's afraid to send him empty-handed without explaining the charge. So when Agrippa visits, he suggests that Paul come and appear before Agrippa with the Jews, the accusers, so that he, that is Agrippa, can help Festus to write something to accompany him to Rome. So the Apostle Paul appears before these two gentlemen, and this is what he says. And now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made by Yahuwah to our fathers. To this promise, our 12 tribes, earnestly serving Yahuwah night and day, hope to attain. You must understand that this is after Yeshua had come and gone. And yet you find the 12 tribes still hoping for a promise that they know that Yah made to the fathers. That is Abraham, Yitzchak, and Jacob. And we saw that. That is why we had to go back to the beginning to understand what was promised. Because these are the things that the 12 tribes, the Apostle Paul says, our 12 tribes are still waiting for. They're still hoping to attain as they earnestly serve Yahuwah night and day. And then you find the 12 tribes in Revelation 21. We are skipping James and other passages that will talk about the 12 tribes, but I just want to demonstrate that these 12 tribes permeate the biblical narrative. The narrative is about them. They are the Hebrews of the Bible. Revelation 21, we read in verse 10, "Come, I will show you the bride, Lamb's wife. And he carried me away." And later on he says, "And he showed me the holy Jerusalem." Later on, he says, "She had a great and high wall with 12 gates." He's describing this new Jerusalem that comes down from heaven. And he says, "And the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Yshar'el." I bet you some of you are seeing this for the first time, because I did not see this until I was out of the Western church. Now, it's my fault that I didn't read Revelation. I cannot blame anybody else. But there were people who claimed to be my teachers, and they never, ever read this to me and explained to me what it means. Even Acts 26, I don't remember hearing a sermon on Acts 26. Hey, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that we must read for ourselves. The 12 tribes are what the Bible is about. The 12 tribes are a kingdom of priests. We read that in Exodus chapter 19. Let's read it again. Sorry, we didn't read this. I've read it so many times that, I think I've read it, in this course. It says, "And Moses went up to Yahuwah." This is when Yshar'el came out of Egypt, and they are camped at Mount Sinai, or next to Mount Sinai, and Yah appears to them there. He speaks to Moses first. He says, Yahuwah said, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Yshar'el." Now, you can say that Moses is playing matchmaker here, all right? Yah is sending him. In Spedi, we call it Mutzeta. He's a go in between for Yah to Yshar'el. Yshar'el is the wife that Yah is quoting here, right? Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Yshar'el, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And then later on in verse 8, Yshar'el responded, all that Yahuwah has spoken, we will do. And the marriage was sealed. The bride accepted the proposal. And they were married at Mount Sinai. They became a kingdom of priests. They became a special treasure to Yah. They became a holy nation because Yah then lived with them. All that Yah has spoken, we will do. You must appreciate that. This must not be forgotten by your descendants, your children, their children. You must know that your people said to Yah, all that you have spoken, Yahuwah, we will do. That is the only nation that has that distinction. Yshar'el, the kingdom of priests. Yshar'el, the kingdom of Yah. This is the commonwealth of Yshar'el. In 1 Chronicles 28, David is speaking. He had gathered the leaders of Yshar'el. He's heading towards the end of his life. And part of what he said is this, verse 5, and of all my sons, for Yah has given me many sons, he has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of Yah over Yshar'el. He has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of Yah over Yshar'el. Before that, he would have said, Yah has made me king of Israel forever. So even as we see Solomon sitting, and obviously Solomon died, we see Yahusha comes as the son of David, and he becomes this eternal king of Yshar'el, in the kingdom of Yah over Yshar'el. Then lastly, we have Yshar'el, the people of Yah, forever. And forever means everlasting. Jeremiah 30, I think, would say that as long as the ordinances of the sun and the moon and the stars persist, Yshar'el will remain a nation before me. This is Yah speaking. He says, if the dimensions of the universe, I think the earth or the universe, can be measured, then Yshar'el will stop being a nation before me. Yshar'el is this forever people of Yah. It's not going to change. Nothing is going to change that. Look at what David would say, again, going back a couple of chapters. 1 Chronicles chapter 17. In 21, it reads, and who is like your people, Yshar'el? This is David speaking to Yah. The one nation on the earth whom Alua went to redeem for himself as a people, to make for yourself a name by great and awesome deeds, by driving out nations from before your people, whom you redeemed from Egypt. For you have made your people, Yshar'el, your very own people forever. And you, Yah, have become their Alua, their God. Yshar'el, the people of Yah, forever. This was confirmed earlier on by someone who was not an Israelite. The story of Balaam and Balak. Balak, the king of that place, I think it's the Amorite, caused Balaam to come and curse the children of Yshar'el. Balaam could not. And Balaam was given 3 utterances, if I remember correctly. And this is the last one. Verse 5. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Yshar'el. Like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by Yah, like cedars beside the waters. He shall pour water from his bucket, and his seed shall be in many waters. He is king. Who's king? Jacob, Yahuwah, Yahusha. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Agag is related to Edom. God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows. He bows down, my apologies. He lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. Same words that Isaac said to Jacob. Balaam would say it, inspired by the Spirit of Yahuwah, to the children of Yshar'el. So Yshar'el is this promise that Yah kept, and they will remain his people forever. Now, as you go through the narrative, the historical narrative, you see that Joshua would succeed Moses. And if you read, and I'd like to encourage you to read Joshua 21, you'll see that Yah had kept all the promises that he had made. All the promises that he had made thus far, right? Because we can understand that the promises extended beyond. But at the point of Joshua, when they conquered the promised land, Yah did everything that he had promised. And then you look at 2 Chronicles 9, where we find indeed Solomon reigning over the king of that region, and in fact all the kings of the earth coming to him bearing gifts to hear the wisdom that Yah had placed in him. Again, read 2 Chronicles 9 and be inspired, because that is where we are going back to. When the apostles ask Yeshua in Acts 1, when Yeshua says, hey, don't leave Jerusalem, wait for the gift my Father has promised that I've spoken to you about. And they're excited. They say, oh, is this the time that you are going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And our teachers never really interrogated Yeshua's response to that question. They dismiss it. They say, the apostles were still short-sighted and all that. But Yeshua responds and says to the disciples, it is not for you to know the times and the seasons the Father has set in his own authority. What does that mean? You can figure it out yourself. It is not for you to know the times and the seasons that the Father has set in his authority. Has set to do what? What is the question? To restore the kingdom to Yshar'el. So the kingdom is going to be restored to Yshar'el. So, but what is next? When? And this is what we are looking forward to. The question remains, but we watch as world events unfold, and we see Yah doing what he said he's going to do before he establishes his kingdom. And for those of us who were taught that the kingdom was established at Pentecost in Acts 2, I hope you understand now that that is a wrong doctrine, but figure it out yourself. Because in Luke 21, it tells us when the kingdom will be established. Specifically, it says that the kingdom will be established after the destruction of the temple. In fact, way after the destruction of the temple. But that's for you to, decipher and understand as we study together. The people of Yshar'el are looking forward to this city. Acts 1, like I said, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Yshar'el? So I'd like you to think about Yeshua's response to the question. His response was, it is not for you. My apologies. It is not for you. A big mistake I made there. It is not for you to, let me do that. Okay, sorry. I'm not gonna, how can I do this? How can I, let me see, how can I do that? Let me write. It is not, it is not, it is not, okay? It goes here. That's how we used to do it in the primary. It is not for you to know times and seasons. So think about what it means, or that response. Okay, so I hope we have been able to try to cover the whole narrative and really talk about the inheritance of the descendants of Abraham, Yatsecha, and Jacob. We will develop this narrative by looking at what happens to the nation of Ephraim, right? Very important to the biblical story. But for now, let me stop here and we can see each other on the next Shabbat. I will post this on in the classroom, and you can have a look at it when you have time. And I'll also post the next topic so that we can go through it by yourself. Okay, let me say shalom to you and see you next time.